All right, good morning. Senate Judiciary, April 16th, 2024. Those of you who missed the Patriots Day celebration in Boston, Maine, and other places, it's the annual Boston Marathon. And it was always a highlight for me as a kid because they used to run a block from my house where I grew up. We would get to see them. Hopkinton was the next town over to Ashland, and they would run by on Main Street in Ashland. And I used to see these guys, and the weather was variable. I can remember it very warm, very cold, but they were always running in the news media and the state police. It was an exciting time. So one thing I missed, but now it's become much bigger than when I was a kid. But it was Patriots Day. And I celebrated by taking the day off and having a toothbrush. Anyhow, so with that, we were taking up section 26 of the Capitol bill, as we've been requested by Senator Ingalls of the Institutions Committee. So I think we'll start with Damien and the amendment, and then hear from Jennifer Fitch and anybody from corrections who would also like to speak. And anybody else who would like to speak. But again, corrections policy will be in corrections policy bill.
Great, thank you. For the record, I'm Damien Leonard from Legislative Council. So the one change to the amendment is, as requested by the committee, we added a definition of reentry facility. I worked on this with Ben Novogroski and Katie McLean from our office. So we've defined it. And then I also should note that I utilized public information on reentry facilities from national corrections groups, Maine, the U.S. courts, and the Federal Bureau of Prisons to help inform some of the drafting. So this defines reentry facility as a facility at which incarcerated individuals prepare to transition back into the community following release. Reentry facilities provide services or enable incarcerated individuals to obtain services that will facilitate the transition back into the community, including career and housing supports, vocational education, job placement, mental health counseling, substance use disorder treatment or recovery services, financial education, assistance with obtaining public benefits, and other similar services. So it's a broad definition. It was intended to capture the umbrella of services that may be provided. You could say reentry facilities may provide some or all of the following services to enable to facilitate transition back into the community. But I think for our purposes here, because this is a capital planning bill and it's not a correctional policy bill.
Yeah, I think the one place you could do that is on line 5 by putting in including but not limited to.
Anytime we say including, it means but not limited to.
Oh, I didn't know.
So yeah, it's actually in Title 1. It was so that we could stop saying that every time we said including. We put that in there a few years back. So anytime you see including it, it includes but not limited to.
Then I think it's fine.
Was there a drafting decision because this is the capital bill not to include that it would be a low security facility? Because I do think you could provide all of these services in a high security setting and then it still meets the criteria of reentry.
Yep, we could say on line 1, reentry facility means a low security facility at which incarcerated individuals prepare to transition back. So that wasn't a specific decision. That would just be my lack of knowledge in the correctional area.
Check with corrections to make sure that if we do that, for example, if they're at Springfield and they're being transitioned out into southern Vermont, that is a high security or medium security facility. I wouldn't want them not to be able to transition there. And back to the original 4 community facilities, Woodstock, St. Johnsbury, Rutland, and South Burlington were all designed for reentry, but they were also in some sections.
And I would say there's nothing,
Jennifer?
My name is Jennifer Fitch. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Buildings and General Services. A couple of things when we use the term security. We use physical security inside of BGS when we talk about security, right? That's the physical means of security for the building. There's also the people security side as well, right? People that also help keep the facility secure. So I would just try to better define what you mean by secure. And then the secondary piece to that, I would say, is that the plan right now for co-located facilities is that they would be sharing some of the same programming space.
Mhm.
That programming space will be physically secure because it's providing programming space for everyone, right, that's using that campus.
Right.
Yeah, I guess so my concern as we're using this definition in this section is we're talking about what's going to be built. And so I really want to be thoughtful about making sure we're building something that really is sort of transformative and not necessarily what we've seen in the past, which was very high security and less sort of campus-like.
Yeah, I'm not sure that will fit. These are initial phases, and I think as we get more information about where the reentry facilities are and what they're gonna look like, that might be the better time to do that. But we don't have minimum and we don't have maximum security anywhere, right?
I'm gonna let Sabrina.
Sabrina Carriage, project manager with BGS. So Vermont is not very traditional in the way we describe our minimum, medium, maximums. We don't have maximum in Vermont at all, and we don't have anything above medium for women. And medium is not actually traditional medium. And I would caution you definitely, if you go to Atlanta, check with DOC because their definition of low security may not mean what you are intending to mean.
It's the definitions, that's why I was saying, there's like the people side of security, but then there's the physically secure side of a building.
No, I'm happy to check with DOC, and I think that makes sense. I just want to make sure we're defining what we really mean to be building. And I think the security is a piece of that.
Well, look at, is everybody okay with the language that Damien drafted with them?
So generally, aside from the concern I already raised.
And to Chairman Sears' point, and sorry, I was thinking women, but we must be in the males reentry section. So we are super, super early. Like we haven't even put pen to paper yet on a men's reentry facility. So we haven't even sat down and said, what are your requirements? And then, what does that mean for our building? So to your point, we've got a long timeline here. And I'm happy to report back to the committee once we've done planning programming, and then we have a better sense of what that building may look like in the future.
Great. Before we, thank you, Damien, before we approve this, I'd like to hear from BGS. Or before we approve it or change it or do anything else.
yes.
Who have provided us with kind of an outline of the beds that are contemplated.
This is our second attempt to explain beds.
Do you want to sit in the chair? Sorry, I'm also trying. Here, I'm going to grab this. You want to sit there? Okay. Here, I'm going to grab yours just so I can read this while she's talking about beds. Sorry. We'll do a little dose of dope there.
Your chairs are much more comfortable than the house, I have to say.
Well, we try to treat our witnesses better than the House does. I've always taken great pride in that as chair of this committee, and I hope whoever takes over when I leave will keep that tradition.
So these are,
We've heard a lot of stories from witnesses about how they're treated there, particularly the chairs.
our second attempt to explain beds, and I wish DOC was here to help me, but I will do my best.
And just so you know, they would be here today, but they're actually in Washington DC,
I knew
all of
that.
them. Okay, I just want you to know.
Well, not the whole department.
Everyone that would be in here with us
Yeah,
today is
it
down
is in Washington.
Yeah.
I knew that, but I just want to make clear it's not the entire department.
It's true, yes, you are
Yeah,
correct.
there still are probation officers and guards and superintendents and. Okay, so go ahead with the
All
bed.
right, so we've tried to make a chart to explain this better. So your bed types are in the first column. Existing beds are what is currently at Chittenden. DOC proposed beds is the total number of each type we're proposing in the new facility. And then we broke it down into the third column, which is called future capacity. So this is the ideal operating number that we would not go above. And then the second column, the last column is that 15% above that 85%. Those are your operational beds. So ideally, you want to have open beds, multiple open beds in every type of housing, because you never know who is coming into the facility, who in the facility needs additional help, will need different placement, things like that. And so that is those operational beds above where the department ideally sits on how many people are actually in the facility. So this is our best attempt to explain that.
And it allows BGS to go into the facility and do work, as we said. So we provide maintenance services to all the correctional facilities, and we need to make sure that we have capacity to get into certain spaces, right, and do work inside the facility.
And then, of course, a description of what beds are.
What is the current other category?
So because the current facility doesn't have a lot of units, we don't have all these specialty beds. Those beds are for basically whatever category they need them for. It could be, they could have, so like right now they have no flex housing, they have no acute mental health. So things like that would be what those beds are for. Sometimes they just split up a unit, like if there's some animosity between individuals in the unit, maybe they need a little break from the unit for a while, you need to split up a group, things like that. So it's just whatever unit they need that they don't currently have.
Can I ask about honors? Which honors and reentry are my two biggest areas of hope.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if honors and reentry are designed to be in the same campus area, or are they?
So
And how many women actually have sentences that are more than 5 years?
So there's, DOC will have to speak to that. I know there's quite a few. How we determine these numbers was looking at the actual sentences of who is currently there. So right now, the honors unit is primarily made up of women who would move to reentry, but the honors in the new facility would be very similar to reentry, except they're women that have a very long sentence and aren't eligible for reentry. When you're in a facility for a long amount of time, you need different things from that facility than women that are there for a short amount of time. I mean, if you're there for a short amount of time, you're really not that invested in the community. You're there, you're gonna do your month or whatever, and then you're gonna leave. Or if you're there for, 10 years, 15 years, you're looking for more of a community. Those are actually also usually better behaved, because they are there for a long amount of time. It's where they live. And so they need less restriction, less supervision than women that are there for just a short amount of time.
And why double occupancy?
So once again, that's a thing DOC should talk about, but they've actually discovered that it's better for your mental health to have a roommate. It also, and they actually have some statistics of the reduction of suicide.
Who the roommate is, but
That's true, and they do place they do place you so that, with someone you get along with. They're not purpose, they, just like a college dorm, situation.
I'm
where-
just thinking back to,
Mhm. And like I said, not all of the beds are filled, and so sometimes you may not have a roommate. And if you're someone who doesn't get along with a roommate, then you just wouldn't, DOC would place you so that you would not have a roommate.
yes,
And that's all kind of gets into the operation, so someone's job is there to basically just do the roommate situation. And like I said, it's just like a college dorm, they look at who's gonna get along,
so,
and place people together.
my question, I guess, is the 80 minimum medium security beds that are really hopefully 68. And, that's what seems high to me.
The 68 beds?
Well, 80 or 68, either one seems high to me based upon the number of women who are incarcerated for long periods and
So
for
remember,
very violent offenses.
so remember what Sabrina said the last time she was here. So part of this is Vermont doesn't have a lot of money. And so we need to be as cost effective with the money that we have, right, on behalf of the taxpayers. So the most efficient, which means the most cost effective bill for her is a 40-person pod. Two 40-person pods equals 80. And the reason why you need 2 pods is because you may have 2 residents that don't get along in the same pod. And so you want to be able to put them in the other pod, right? To avoid those
Yes.
kind of personal conflicts. And so there is a little bit of math and cost effectiveness that also goes into the numbers as well. But that's why you're seeing 80, in addition to studying the population that you need, that's also why you're seeing that 80 person number as well.
And so right now, detainees have to be held in medium security, and that's usually around 55 people. These units are we're designing them, so, the women in Vermont don't need traditional medium. We don't lock in. They don't have the need. So these, and the only difference between a medium and a minimum is that you can lock in a room in a medium, where in a minimum you don't. So our units are actually designed all the same. We don't have any wet cells. We don't have locks. We're not locking in either unit. So these units are interchangeable. So if that rule were to change and they can be held in minimum, the only thing you have to do is unlock one of the outer doors to the unit. It becomes a minimum security unit. And so we're building that flexibility into the plan if that rule were to change, or if those were to, there was talk about a possibility of them being reentry.
Senator Bob.
So the decrease in number of honors beds, is that because most of those women would be eligible for reentry?
They reentry, yes.
So that's helpful to understand. I do have concern that there's just not enough reentry beds. I want to see more reentry beds and fewer.
So we have designed the core to take an additional 30-bed unit with the reentry. It's going to take a while for DOC to build this program. Maine had a program for 10 years before they built a facility. And because of our restraints at Chittenden, we don't have, we're not currently building that program with employers on the outside. So DOC does anticipate that after some time, after this, this program will be successful and they will be able to build that additional unit and take more women in. And so we're building the core to accommodate that in the future.
So the other thing to remember, right, is we brought in an expert, we brought in HOK, and they looked, and we've done 2 very extensive studies. Happy to send you the links, I think we should do that. But we've been looking at these bed count numbers now for 3 years. So it isn't that we picked it out of a hat and said, we just need this random number over here, right? They've taken a lot of time and a lot of effort, and I will tell you, HOK is recommending more beds than what we are proposing. And I just really want that to sink in with people. They want more beds.
And I will say,
They want less.
I will say anecdotally, during the design process, we actually realized we did not have enough beds to house the current population and had to up the number. So, this is very thought out, and we are trying to, we're really trying to build the facilities that we need.
And then it's gonna last for 50 years, that it's gonna be flexible. Like, I love a tiny home. I don't know why, but I really wanna have a tiny home someday. But when you look at a tiny home, right, what do? They make those spaces very flexible so that you can modify spaces based on the use and the function when you're living in a tiny home, right? We need to have a very flexible facility because we only have one, right? And we need to have that be flexible for the population over a 50-year period. we're doing the best job we can to identify what the right number of beds is, but the other thing that I really want to resonate with folks is that it's DOC that's ultimately held accountable, right, for managing the population, and part of that is they need the space to do that, and if we don't have adequate space, then what happens? We're triple bunking, we're fitting up a gym that shouldn't be fit up to house these women, or we're sending them out of state, which is the worst outcome, right? I don't think anybody wants that. So, well, I recognize, and I continue to hear this, and it's really DOC that should be out in front. I will just tell you, I've been a partner with them for a long time, and they have definitely done their due diligence on giving you the minimal numbers of beds that they possibly can, while still being able to function, right? And being held accountable for their duties in the statute for the state of Vermont.
Okay,
And the other thing I want to add is, we call these units a name because we have to call them something, but we're actually designing the facilities so they all have the same amenities. They all have access to outdoor space. They all have, a little like kitchenette area in the unit that they can access, microwave, things like that. And so in the future, as the population changes, we can convert these units to other things.
so, other questions for BGS?
I think those are questions are for DLC.
Yeah, I think we can talk more about the size. But thank you very much. Any comment from anybody else who'd like to comment on the proposed draft 2.1 or the beds?
And if this is helpful, that's good to know.
It is helpful.
If you want to see something different,
No,
or you have
this is
questions, let us
extremely
know.
helpful,
Okay, because we can modify this.
because you're talking about having detainees and everything that honors and reentry, correct? So your detainee population would be part of the 68 or 80 bed minimum medium security.
That is how and I believe there's language somewhere that states this.
Yeah.
That is how it is right now. So we have to
So
design for that,
that's
but
the,
also the future.
That's the difficult population to predict because it all depends on who gets detained and how many get detained and why. Okay, thank you. So I'm clearer now on the pods. I understand that actually. The most efficient is 80, it's why it bothers me when they build small facilities. Because that's how, frankly, other states deal with corrections problems, is pods take less staff to supervise.
Right, and that also has to do with we're looking for a staffing efficiency as well. And so if you get larger than that, you need additional staff because just the visual aspect of the space is larger, less easy to supervise. So that's what that comes into. And so if you're doing smaller units, then you're also using additional staff because you have a staff in the
Yeah, all of our facilities should be audited. Thank you. Who else, is there anybody else who'd like to comment?
I just like to, so for the record, Paul Bushilling, State Director of the ACLU of Vermont. This might be more appropriate for the discussion around corrections policy. And I just wasn't sure when you were going to be talking a little bit more in depth about the numbers. Okay, so happy to wait to speak till next week.
Okay. Okay, great. So the committee's okay with recommending this to the. I'm gonna take 10 minutes since we're scheduled to, on a different subject that's not on the agenda. And I did a lot of work with Amy and on the budget issues we heard about, trying to fit 8 million into $22 million in requests. So.
Thank
you. Oops, there was a second page. Oh, there was only 3.
This might be a package. Do you want me to make a copy of all this?
There's a back.
Was the whole thing a package?
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
Are you all set with us?
Yes.
Great.
Oh,
Thank you. Just wanted to
I
make
guess
sure.
okay, this is the second page. So we've only got one extra copy.
I'll make a bunch of.
Well, either that or Senator Browski and Senator Norris can share. Or do whatever you like.
Do you have another one of this, or is?
I don't. I've got only the,
Okay, let me go make 2 copies of this real quick. Do you want me to keep them?
make about 5 copies.
5 copies? Do you want me to keep the live stream running while I go do this?
Yeah, because I can go over it.
Sounds good.
So, the good news is we had 8 million over the budget to work, 8.5, actually 8.5 million to work with. And the bad news is we had 22 million in requests.
I thought we whittled it down to about 11 million in here.
Yeah, I think we did that last time around when we went through it.
We still have.
I know, it's still more than 8.5. I'm not good at math, but I can do that math.
My proposal is to not, not help, unfortunately, I left off, Human Rights Commission, Victim Services. I think we did that, but I left off the Human Rights Commission. And civil justice, 550,000, legal aid. I didn't fund those, and I did propose funding domestic violence. We have basic language, but that's up in the air, and I need to talk with the junior and Google and others that are victim services about that. So I tried to, there was also what developed is a unexpected $300,000 shortfall for the crime victim services in this year's budget, so I put that into one-time request. That we didn't know about. And of the $6 million requested by the Judiciary, I suggested 15 positions. For the state's attorneys, there are 945,000 vacancy savings, with 277 vacancy savings in transport deputies, and 1/4 of their request for new positions. The Defender General is basically everything he asked for, he's already got contract for. So it was hard to whittle down, but I left off his case management system and his ongoing in-person training, since it hasn't been funded in the last few years anyway. But everything else I proposed funding. And in court diversion, it's just their request of 1.1 million is due to raise the age. And so I think that can be done in either, there's no evidence that what will actually be the cost. Yeah, and quite frankly, it's been handled pretty well by the various agencies.
I just worry that if we don't fund that, we're gonna be back here next year with them telling us they can't do it.
Well, there's a thing called budget adjustment, which my belief is that some people will know more about what, if you remember, all the testimonies when we went to 18, there was actually decreased costs in corrections and some increased costs in the communities, but by and large, more kids were handled without a disruption of services. The real problem was with the kids who were difficult to place. So anyway, I worked very hard with various people. The language where is, why don't I go over it now that everybody's got copies? So in the judiciary, we would, if this proposal works, we'd fund the 11 judicial officer twos, fully fund the language access, which they said they're required to do under federal law. One specific 15 positions with 200,000 savings, including the appropriation. She said that would actually save in limited service staff. She being Terry. And then approves the additional chins, Superior Court judge funded with tobacco chins, which is, which it had been as a master.
So what are the other 4 positions that we're looking at here? You get 11 judicial officers, then you get 15 positions. What are the other 4 positions?
They were, you have to go back to their original request, which I don't have in front of me. They asked for that is the 15. We're basically funding we're not funding the judicial court security at the level they requested. We're not funding the tech fund revenue replacement. If we do this, we're funding the 15 new staff. I think most were administrative and legal aides. Do you have? Thank you. 15 new staff, 10 judicial assistants, 2 IT help desk analysts, 2 centralized service analysts, and 1 database administrator. Potential for 220,000 savings with new positions versus contracted positions. Language access was required.
Was this just for the courts, Dick, or? Because I know the judges needed theirs is not built into this one. The judges needed an assistant also, the 3 new judges.
Yeah, no, this is built in here. Okay. I don't know how that all works. This was their request. So now don't forget the house is funded differently. Everything is different in the house. They funded it in H880. And I believe they funded it for half a year in HH80 because they used the corporate tax. So when the conference committee meets, assuming the House doesn't accept our version of the bill, it will be a debate. I believe the 604,000 is the under justice reinvestment is for the diversion programs. Just written in a little different way than I'd seen before.
So on line 29 on the back of the front page here.
Yep.
There were 6 new permanent classified positions at a cost of 2.4. That's been cut to 1 million?
Yep.
So how many positions is that now? Is that 3 or
2.75?
2.75?
I think it's probably enough.
Okay.
You know,
I mean,
Quite
DOC
frankly.
told us they needed 14, so.
well, you know, they didn't want to do it. So they also have vacant positions that they can fill. We'll work with the commissioner.
What, did you hear about what the impact is going to be? So on the front page, line 8, the field offices to help clear the backlog. They asked for $1.2 million to do that. Did you get any sense of what the impact on not clearing the backlog will be, both financially and from a public safety standpoint?
I don't know that I did not.
Okay.
But I mean, they obviously had their position, but I think I asked them for their priority.
Okay.
One question I have here, in looking at that exact line, actually, for line 8, the 10 limited service positions, and then compared to line 6, the 10 deputy SAs, is there any sort of duplication happening there with these staff numbers?
Possibly. But their biggest priority, I don't think so. That doesn't add up. Well, yes, it does. 18. Yeah, I asked them for their biggest priority, which was the 9 vacancy prosecutor positions.
Yeah, they definitely shouldn't be cutting their staff by 9.
Right, they were gonna have to cut staff or lay them off.
Hey, it is what it is. It's a tough year. I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
not everybody's gonna get what they want. It's not Christmas. I mean,
the issue that the appropriations committee faces is the House raised 135, 132, or 135 million, I've heard both, in taxes. And I believe Senate Finance is looking at around 20 million in fees and other things to make the budget balance. So out of that 20 million, we get for justice-related issues 8.5 right now.
but I am curious about what Senator Hashim brought up on 6 and 8 to make sure that there's no duplication of services are on line 6 and line 8.
It doesn't look like we're funding line 8, so.
Right, but
Okay.
I think what I'm wondering is if any of those positions are being funded in line 6, and if we're accidentally seeing a higher cost as a result, like a higher cost in both their request and the base funding there.
See if we can find the state's attorney's request. Done.
State's attorneys? Yep. This is Senator Hashim's copy, so it has his notes on it, if you're okay. I don't know where your folder is. You might have taken it out of the foundation.
Mine's down in the appropriation. I don't know, maybe you can read your own,
It's hard to decipher my notes.
but, well, actually, I think it's fairly clear what they're responding to the half years. This is my first time doing this, by the way. I've never consulted the committee. So,
I mean, and as Senator Hashim tries to figure out the answer between 8 and 6, my only other concern, and if it is what it is no increase to legal aid, particularly around housing and eviction. I think we're gonna see a huge increase in evictions, and the collateral cost of homelessness is pretty astronomical to both communities and frankly, the budget.
quite honestly, I don't know how they got in on this side, because they're really not we don't usually deal with legal aid, and I don't even deal with the legal aid budget.
Okay.
Capacity, I don't think I have. It's usually, I think somebody else in the committee deals with legal aid.
So is it possible that some of this work is being funded somewhere else?
Possible, I don't know.
Okay.
I will know today sometime. Could you just send a note to Heather asking who on the Judiciary, on the Appropriations Committee deals with legal aid?
Yep, Heather.
I can't pronounce her last name.
Okay.
Heather should come up, it's a G.
Is she from JFL?
No, she's the committee assistant.
In folks?
Yeah.
Oh, Hannah.
Hannah, thank you.
Yes.
God almighty. You know.
So it was who handles legal aid on folks?
Yeah.
So it's
Yes.
a little unclear. I mean, it looks like the 10 limited service positions that are in line 8 are their own positions. And then there's 19 other positions, but I'm not, based on how it's written, I don't know if those 10 are under those 19. And then there's the 4 temps. So it looks like these are positions that are already being filled, from what I'm reading, by the one-time money.
I think they were funded through ARPA, and they're
Yes.
trying now to get them funded
Right.
through the general fund.
Clearing that backlog.
I mean, if they would prefer to fund the 900,000 in those positions, I don't have a problem. I mean,
They can put it where they want to
they
put
put
it.
it where they
Yeah.
want. That doesn't, I mean, they haven't seen this yet, so.
Oh, so they could put it either to 6 or 8?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't, and they don't wanna buy back the 3 deputies, they can put that there too. This is just recommendation.
And did we find out that those 3 deputies really did need to be, because I know that the issue with the state's attorneys was there weren't 9 vacancies, but my
Right.
understanding with the deputies is there have been vacancies, so there
Yeah.
should be actual vacancy savings.
Yeah, we can certainly move that.
Okay.
If you think that would be better, we can move that.
I
This is
mean,
all, we can move it somewhere else.
I personally would love to see
I
it.
haven't given this to the Appropriations Committee yet.
If there really are vacancy savings, I would love to see at least some of that money go to the Human Rights Commission for one of their positions. Because we heard that they're so overwhelmed and they're turning people away with human rights cases, and that doesn't feel good to me.
Yeah, that is my part of the budget.
Whether that's the intake specialist or the staff attorney, or both.
Probably the intake specialist the most. Let me think about it.
Right. Yes, thank you.
I'll take that, wherever you found it. So I will work more on this. So I believe there's a $300,000 one-time ask for the Department of Corrections. That just came through, that there's some company that's willing to help the Department of Corrections, believe it or not. And with data, and it's all free.
Oh,
We definitely need data, the data on people.
yes, if I've learned one thing this session, Senator Sears, is that we have garbage data
On cases.
across the board.
Yeah, DCF is horrible, and corrections is horrible on data.
In our sort of general crime data, like everything has
And we've
come down to
known this
like
for
bad
years.
data.
We've known this for years, and yet we keep spending all this money on technology that doesn't get us to the case management that we need in order to help people in reentry, for example, and other things. We just don't have that data. When we did Justice Reinvestment 1, there was a very difficult time for the Justice Center to get data. So I thought we'd improved. And then when we got to Justice Reinvestment 2, it was the same problem. They couldn't get the data that they needed to make, Justice Reinvestment is a different policy. And they were having a hard time. They had to go to Austin. We had about 5 people in Austin trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
All right, so we're gonna have a decanter.
What are we decanting?
I think it's wine, I'm not sure.
That would certainly be better than insurance, I think.
All right. Eric is here on the 2 decantering bills. Are you?
Yes, I have those folders and Mark Langen is Zoom.
Oh, good morning.
$50 and $270.
So you must be fairly proud of yourself right now. Wow, you're Yankees.
Yeah, it was a nice start to the season, but it's early. I always say that no matter how well you do.
That's true, it is early, isn't it?
Yeah. I think, I would say.
Soto has made a real difference.
He's great. For sure.
Yeah, it's really helped the rest of the lineup. And that Volpe coming on.
Yeah.
Was he really the former governor of Volpe of Massachusetts?
I wonder.
Thanks, Ben. No
We
worries.
really, frankly, need a better bullpen.
Yeah.
That's where we fall down all the time.
Oh, I know, yesterday was horrible. Watching that yesterday, that performance.
Did they start early, like 11?
Yeah, 11.
Okay.
So, I got an email today, one of the witnesses from the chief of police from Windsor, who I invited, can't come on Thursday because they are gonna be, at the baseball game. The Red Sox game, they're gonna be doing the colors.
Oh, nice.
So, yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It is pretty cool.
Print that up on the topic of,
Ask him to get me an autograph with Tristan Cash.
I will ask, that's what you specifically requested.
I requested that. I hated him last year at the beginning of the year. The first baseman.
Yeah.
Yeah, it turned into a surprise. All right, so this is all live on YouTube, and I've got that information about my request for an autograph. And that has nothing to do with the decanting bills. So the uniform is the first one up, is the Uniform Trust Decanting Act. And I'm gonna ask if there's any changes, or anybody has anything to add to that? If not, Oh, yeah, we're gonna finish up.
Which
I
one?
was ready to say it's done. We're on 279
279.
first, and we're gonna complete the walkthrough, and do you remember where we
Oh,
stopped?
right, because we had all
I
of the
thought
tech
I was
issues.
all done with the walkthrough.
Right, but we kept getting interrupted by power loss.
Yes.
That's right, that day was the day of the power outage. So,
17, page 17.
page, thank you, Senator, for that.
Oh, you're on top of it.
Well, I try.
For
Might be a
that
good
fine,
presenter for
Senator
this.
Norris won't be required to report the decanting.
No.
You're excused from this one.
Thank you very much.
Trust for beneficiary with disability. Go ahead, Mark.
Oh, okay, thank you. So picking up from where we were on the day of the snowstorm and losing the power, this section, remember, just overall, what we're talking about is in decanting, it's like decanting wine. You're going to just sort of create this second trust, which you're pouring over the assets from the first trust, and you're making some changes. And this section would allow the change to provide for special needs trusts for beneficiaries who have disabilities and would qualify for governmental benefits such as Medicaid for people under 65 or SSDI, that sort of thing. Or SSI, particularly because that's needs basis, because the purpose of this is, the thought is that settlors of trust might, the trust might go on for quite a long time, and then there's afterborn beneficiaries who have special needs that they hadn't thought about, and so it's the ability for the trustee to make changes to allow this beneficiary so that those assets in the trust would not be exhausted and would be there as a support net for the disabled beneficiary. So it does require that the beneficiary has a disability. For example, in the commentary, it says you can't be decanting into a trust which would, basically to pay tuition to a needs-based college. No, you have to have a physical disability that the government recognizes, and that you're be entitled to a governmental benefit. And the purpose is to further the purposes of the trust. So that, let's say, for example, let's say if a trust said that the beneficiary had the right to the income, or that there was a mandatory distribution of principal, or that the trust or the beneficiary could get all the money when they turn 30, that the decanting, this provision would allow you to decant to take those away so that that person might qualify for those governmental benefits. It goes on to say that it can't affect the interests of the other beneficiaries of the trusts at all. So that's basically, and that is cited also as one of the reasons for maybe passing the Trust Decanting Act, is to create these special needs trusts that are needed for disabled beneficiaries that the grantor hadn't counted on. Moving on to 1414 on charitable trusts. Again, big picture, we have decanting. We can have, every state has decanting, and it just requires that the trustee has discretion over distribution of principal. So when they can do that, they can move it from one trust to another. But what the Decanting Act does is put on guardrails, and this is an excellent section that explains what those guardrails are with respect to protecting charitable trusts. So, or charitable beneficiaries of trusts. It does not apply, you cannot decant if all you have are charitable beneficiaries. So or a beneficiary. So if you just have a trust and the only beneficiaries are charities or charitable purpose, this act does not apply to that. There's no decanting. Number two is that, that it should be known that if there's a split interest trust, let's say what we call a charitable remainder unit trust or an annuity trust, where the grantor usually retains an interest for their life at a certain percentage of the fair market value of the assets, and then it goes to charity after their death. That's not subject to the Decanting Act either, because in those cases, the trustee has no discretionary power over the principal. So those sort of trusts are off the table. So basically what this statute says, though, to the extent that there are basically two types of charities, identified charities, like the American Red Cross or the American Cancer Society, or let's say that there's an unidentified beneficiary, such as I'm going to create a park for the citizens of Montpelier. Those have to carry over in any decanting to a second trust. You cannot change, number one, the identified beneficiaries or the purposes or any restrictions on the trust. So that's the guardrail, that you can't be disenfranchising any trust or any charity with a decanting. Next section, 1415, regarding trust limitations of decanting. There are basically four rules in this, is that the authorized fiduciary cannot decant if, number one, the instrument doesn't allow it, or two, state law prohibits it. Simple. Number two is a prohibition to modify, amend, or revoke a spendthrift clause in a trust doesn't prohibit decanting. So they just wanted to make it clear that just because you might have a prohibition against it doesn't mean you can't decant. Three, an authorized fiduciary can decant even if they have the power to amend the trust. So it's just saying, okay, just because you have a power to amend doesn't prohibit you from using this decanting statute to do that. And the fourth rule under this section is on trust limitations on decanting is that any restrictions that are imposed in the first trust have to carry over to the second trust. So the next section, 1416, change in compensation. Simple rule, trustees cannot decant to a second trust, which would increase their compensation, unless, number one, is that all the beneficiaries agree to it, or two, the court approves it. And the reason why, sometimes you cannot get all of the beneficiaries to approve, not because they disapprove, it's just that it can't be found, or we don't know who they are, or where they are, that sort of thing. So but you can use a court procedure where you say, hey, I'm going to put this to the court, and I'm going to notify all the beneficiaries, and they can object to it if they want. And then you also have the court who says, well, if a beneficiary doesn't show up, the court could still say, I don't think that's right. You shouldn't be able to do that. So that's 1416 in a nutshell. 1417 is called relief from liability and indemnification. And again, what this is saying is that the authorized fiduciary cannot decant to a second trust so that they can expand their limited liability. Just can't do that. But just note that it may be that if your liability is limited by state law, if you decant to another state, then indirectly it may affect a more limited liability for the authorized fiduciary, and that's okay if the main purpose is to change the situs, and ancillary or corollary is that it might affect the liability of the trustee. That would be okay. But it also is clear that if there is when you decant, to the extent that there's a liability attached to the property, let's say a mortgage or a UCC security interest, that doesn't get lost in the decanting. That stays, that carries over. And the statute, the fourth thing it does say is that let's say that if you decant to a trust which has a trust director or a co-trustee where you're dividing fiduciary duties, then the original trustees' duties might get circumscribed because they're shared with somebody else. But all the fiduciary duties are there. It's just spread among different people. And that's okay to do under the Decanting Act. So moving on to 1418, removal or replacement of authorized fiduciary. It's kind of like the compensation provision. An authorized fiduciary cannot decant or change any power to remove or replace a trustee unless, one, slightly different, the qualified beneficiaries agree instead of all the beneficiaries. So qualified beneficiaries are usually your current beneficiaries who are getting income or entitled distributions, or in the alternative, the court approves. So there's a guardrail on the power to decant to change so you don't want trustees who are decanting to a second trust where they can't be removed and they lock themselves in with their commission. Next section, 1419, is a rather long section, but I'll just give you the overview, is that so many of our trusts that we create now are done so because they're motivated by provisions in the Internal Revenue Code, whether they be Q-tip trusts, marital deduction Q-tip trusts, grantor trusts, generation skipping trusts, qualified subchapter S trusts, charitable deduction trusts, annual exclusions, or dealing with retirement. And basically what this provision does is saying that when you decant from trust number 1 to trust number 2, is that you have to keep these intended tax benefits in trust number 2. So, and there's no there's no change for your tax, what you consider to be your tax things. The only one I would say is different is a grantor trust. So what that is, and I'll just digress a second so that you know what a grantor trust is and you understand it, because it's very important right now in tax planning, and it's a sort of interesting. So what was going on basically in the 50s and 60s is that taxpayers, if they had a lot of income, they were reaching upper brackets. And I don't know how many people might know this, but when people think about, let's get back to the good old days, they usually cite Leave It to Beaver as the TV show that time when Leave It to Beaver was on. And during that period, the highest income tax bracket was 90%. The good old days when they could take 90%. Now the highest federal tax rate is 37%. But anyway, so what happened is that what taxpayers were doing is saying, I'm going to move all my assets to all these trusts, and they will only get into the low brackets, and I'll spread out my income among all these entities, and then I won't reach the 20% or 25%. Right. So Congress caught on to that and said, hey, taxpayer, if you retain certain powers in these trusts, we're going to treat you as the owner of that income, and we're going to put it back together, and you're going to catapult you up to the income tax brackets. So that was the purpose of the grantor trust. But what happened in 1986 is that the Congress scrunched the trust tax brackets. And so right now, a trust hits its 37% bracket after $14,450 of income. So now it's not really good to be in a trust and so people like to be grantor trusts. If they have assets in a trust, they want it to be a grantor so that because they're usually in a lower bracket than 37%. So there's been kind of a switcheroo on that. But the one tax thing that this does is it does allow you to decant, to change your status as a grantor trust, where the grantor is deemed the owner of the income, to be a trust, or vice versa, to be a regular trust and then to be a grantor trust. Congress doesn't have a problem because they're still getting their income taxes. That's not going away. That's not changing. So it's just a way to allocate if it's a grantor trust or not. But that's only one small provision within this 1419. 1420 is a simple rule. Duration of the second trust. This provision says it will allow you to decant into a trust that might have a longer duration. So if we have a trust here that's in Vermont, you could say it goes for my children's lives, and then when they die, for my grandchildren's lives, and then when they die, the great-grandchildren's dies. And basically, we cannot have trusts go on in perpetuity for individuals. It's embedded in our Constitution. I think it's Article 2, Section 63, in which the legislature cannot regulate entails into perpetuity. So, but many jurisdictions have gotten rid of the rule against perpetuities. And so this section would allow a decanting into a jurisdiction where they might release the rule against perpetuities. That's a large issue as to the policy considerations, but I just want to let you know that that does allow you to go to a state like decant to Delaware, where they've done away with the rule against perpetuities and create what are called dynasty trusts. In 1421, the need to distribute is not required. So what they're saying is, if the authorized fiduciary may decant whether or not the first trust has a discretionary standard that the authorized fiduciary would have or could have been held to make. What we're dealing there is, let's say you had a trust in the first trust that says that the trustee has the discretion to distribute principal to the beneficiary after taking into account the beneficiary's other resources. So, and under the fact circumstances, the fiduciary would never make a distribution of principal because they have too much. They already have more than they need. And so you would never, as a practical matter, the authorized beneficiary would never be making a distribution of principal to the beneficiary. What this section says is, well, that might be the case, but the mere power that you can distribute, you have discretionary distribution principal to a beneficiary, does allow you to decant. So they just wanted to make that clear, that it's not so much the practicalness, but rather the rule that that the authorized fiduciary has the power to make discretionary distributions of principal that allows a decanting. In the next section called savings provisions, this is 1422. It's like any other savings provision. It basically says three rules. Number one is the second trust provisions that would not have been allowed are in the decanting are deemed to be void. So if you have a provision that does something wrong, then it's circumscribed by what the rules are and the provision's void. The flip side is that a provision could be added to the second trust to make it in compliance with the rules. And the third rule is that the second trustee of the decanted trust can take corrective action. So the whole purpose of the savings provision is to save the trust from being illegal or unenforceable or something like that. So it helps in that regard. In 1423, it's regarding trusts for the care of animals. And this is sort of, it relates to the Vermont Trust Code, and that is 14A VSA 408. And in the second section of the Vermont Trust Code, it says that a person appointed by the trust can enforce it for the benefit of the animal. Or if there's nobody appointed, the probate court can appoint a protector for the animals. And a person who has an interest in the welfare of the animal may petition the probate court to appoint a protector. And if that's done, then what this section says is that we're going to treat the animal as the beneficiary, and the person who is appointed as the protector as a quote qualified beneficiary, and they will have all the rights of a qualified beneficiary. So they'll be able to object to compensation or expansion of limited liability or whatever rights are conferred on a qualified beneficiary would be conferred on the protector of the animals. And it says that the second trust must provide that the trust property be used or applied in the same manner as the first trust and for the same period. So under the animal trust section 408 of the trust code is you can only create trusts for the benefit of animals if they are in existence at the time the trust is created. So no afterborn animals can be protected by or be a beneficiary of the trust. And so when all those animals die off, that's when the trust will terminate. And that's true of a decanted trust. It can't be extended. In 1424, terms of the second trust is one sentence. It says any reference to the Vermont Trust Code in the first trust carries over to the second trust. Simple rule. 1425, settlor. This is sort of a sneaky little rule. It's interesting. It just basically says the settlor of the first trust is the settlor of the second trust. Okay. And the settlor's intent in the first trust carries over to the second trust. So this can affect a number of areas under the Vermont Trust Code, like whether you have an insurable interest. Let's say you have a house that has homeowners insurance, and it goes to the second trust. Then that insurable interest, because it came in through the settlor, that carries over. Or limiting the ability of a settlor to represent beneficiaries. Generally, a settlor can't have virtual representation of any of the beneficiaries. That carries over. Enforcement of charitable trusts. Usually you have to look to the settlor's intent. That carries over. Modification to carry out the settlor's intent in Section 411 of the Vermont Trust Code. That carries over. Creditors' claims. That carries over. Claim against the settlor. The right to request that a trustee be removed. It's over. And the liability of certain discretionary powers up in Section 814 of the Vermont Trust Code carries over. And I think it's probably a good point to point here is that under 32 VSA, I think it's 5811, the definition of a resident trust for income tax purposes. I don't think you have to worry about decanting because of the definition. So basically, a Vermont trust for income tax purposes states that if the contributor to the trust doesn't have to be the settlor or the grantor, it could be a third person who's putting money into the trust. To the extent that a Vermont resident contributes assets to a trust, and that trust becomes, and it's irrevocable, or it becomes irrevocable when the contributor was domiciled in Vermont, then to the extent of that contribution, the income that is generated from that contribution can be taxed by the state of Vermont. And so even if you change the situs to Delaware, if your contributor was domiciled in Vermont, then that income can be taxed by Vermont under our statute. Whether that statute is constitutional or not, I can't go into that. There's been some pushback in other jurisdictions with similar on that, but that will stay the same. So you don't, by changing situs, necessarily change the income tax consequence. Section 1426, later discovered property. It basically says that if property you've decanted and now property is coming into the first trust, it carries over to the second trust. Simple rule. It's just bound by the first trust. 1427, obligations. I sort of hinted at this before. To the extent obligation is attached to trust property, they carry over in the decanting. Be they a mortgage, a UCC interest, or any spousal claim, or anything that attaches to the property would carry over. Then 1428 uniformity, basically it's, these are on all uniform acts. It says that when you're interpreting this uniform act, try to be in compliance with conformity of other jurisdictions and how they're interpreting the act. And that's a great thing about uniform acts, is that we can get guidance from courts in other jurisdictions. 1429 just is also a very standard for all uniform acts, be whatever areas, talking about electronic signatures, basically whatever is in the Electronic Signatures Act that carries over and applies to these. And then there is usually a provision on severability. I don't think it's in this act, but then it does have effective date of July 1. So that is the final end of the walkthrough for it.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mark? Do you have a good summary of this?
We're going to use some of the materials from the uniform, National Conference of Uniform Commissioners, so that should work pretty well.
Okay, hopefully. So is there a motion to report H279 favorably? Oh, wait, is there a motion? All right, I'll move that we report the H279 favorably. Now, is there any discussion from anyone, Mark, Bob, or Chris, or anybody else who would like to discuss this piece of legislation? Okay. Ben, would you please call the roll? I will volunteer to report this as long as I can do it in a Terry Williams style.
I'd go full Bill Doyle.
A brief summary would be helpful.
Yeah, we'll do.
Actually, Terry just reads the bills, beginning to end.
Please don't read this to us on the floor, Senator Sears.
So which one are we starting with?
279.
279.
That's the agenda.
Yep. Alrighty. Senator Bruce.
Yes.
Senator Norris.
Yes.
Senator Grochowski.
Yes, I think.
With explanation. Without explanation.
Senator Hashim on 279.
Yes.
And Senator Bruce.
Yeah.
Or Senator Sears. Sorry.
Yes. And Bob, did you have a comment on the bill? I mean, it's never too late.
No, not on 279, no.
Oh, okay. Well, we're getting to the next one. So I will report the bill. It's only 34 pages. Do we have an hour or two on the floor?
You gonna read it for us?
Well, I thought I might go over it section by section and explain
Line by line.
line by line.
I might be decanting wine in the cloakroom while you do that.
And no, uniform laws are helpful, and that's good to have. But it all depends upon how, in some cases, the tax department or other state government view them. And we've seen cases where they don't seem to follow. So anybody that gets any inkling that state government, particularly the tax department, is not acting in the way that we expect in this, please let the Judiciary Committee know. That's the only way we find things out, is if somebody lets us know. I had no idea about the estate deed until I was notified by my attorney that the person I was gonna leave my house to needed to come up with $1,400 immediately, and I said, well, I haven't died yet, obviously. And it doesn't seem right, not what we thought. So, Mark, thank you very much for your help with this.
Alright, we still need to vote on 330.
Thank you for having me.
We haven't taken it up yet.
Oh, yes, right.
I think we should wait until we take it up.
Sounds good, that's probably a good idea.
Was that, didn't we also go over that one during the power outages?
H350 we went over. That's an act relating to a uniform directed trust. Also known as the Uniform Directed Trust Act. We've been over this. Are there any questions or comments? Bob, I think you had a comment about it?
No, I just.
Does the Bankers Association have any comments?
We're good, Mr. Chair.
You're good. Will this help?
For the record, Chris Delia, President, Vermont Bankers Association. This is a continuation of the partnership between the real VBA Bankers Association and its juniors, the Vermont Bar Association, to update Vermont's trust codes in our state. So yes, it will be beneficial out there in the market. I just have to get my dig in for Mr.
Well, I have to go to my bank soon. I will let them know at the Bank of Bennington. I'm sure Jim Brown will be impressed.
Is this the bill changing the thing that happened with your house?
No,
Okay. Clearly, I'm very confused.
no, that's the one where the other day I got upset when I was doing my
Yes.
state taxes and told my son, you ain't getting the house, I'm selling it and going to Bon Air.
Okay, I wasn't sure if this was the bill that would have fixed that and, no, I mean, you can still go to Bon Air,
No.
but.
That's in the miscellaneous bill.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
There's a lot in the miscellaneous bill as we go along.
It is empty.
It's gonna be empty. Okay, so, is there any discussion on H350? Is there a motion to report favorably as we didn't amend it or do anything to it?
I mean, sometimes the house deserves a few votes that we just send right back their way.
Well, it's a uniform act, so I wouldn't give them much credit. I give all the credit to the practitioners like Mark and the bankers in our Vermont Bar Association. Senator Hashim has moved that we report favorably H350, the Uniform Directed Trust Act. Is there any further discussion?
I will second.
Senator Baruch has seconded that, and so
In a fit of civic responsibility.
is there any further discussion? All right, hearing none. Ben, would you please call the roll?
Yes. Senator Booth,
Yes.
Senator Norris,
Yes.
Senator Walsky,
Sure, yes.
Senator Sheen,
Yes.
Senator Booth.
Aye.
Who's reporting?
I might as well do this one too. if
All
we've
right.
got a nice
Back to back. It's on a
I was gonna say, I
roll.
nominate the lawyer in the room.
No. I'm just kidding. I mean, yes, I would be happy to, unless
Oh,
Senator Sears.
no, if you'd be happy to, I'd be happy to have you have it.
I'd be happy to help.
And I don't know how this is gonna fit with your work as a state trooper. It might be more as your work as a lawyer.
It's mainly just bringing back flashbacks from studying a year ago, but aside from that, yes.
You did a great job on the card though.
Yeah, thank you. Yes. If possible, is there a way to push it until Friday? I'm doing Prop 4 on Thursday and just trying to focus on that for
Sure.
speech, so.
We don't have a time crunch for it.
No, I mean, we're not making any changes, so it goes right to the governor, as long as we pass it before the end of the session.
Sounds good.
Right.
Yeah, just
Hold on to it for a while.
Sounds good.
And before, I could report my bill on Thursday and give you more time to work on your Prop 4.
Sounds good.
I'm planning an hour on the floor. Senator Baruch's been notified. I noticed sometimes when certain people report bills towards the end of the session, there's not a quorum in the room.
Exactly. Well, we used to have that problem, remember with Senator Galbraith,
Yes.
where it was an exodus. The minute he would get up to speak,
The senator from West.
Did you just take a very long time, or?
Well, he was usually filibustering and, wanted everybody to listen to his filibustering, and no one wanted to, so they would just leave the room. And I was unfortunately majority leader, so I had to make sure there was a quorum. So it was fun and games all the time.
And the ambassador was, well, you must know.
Oh, yeah, I've been to his house a few times.
He is quite the senator. We had